Alright, this might be my favorite part. Today we're going to be going over buttons, how to program the buttons, and we're going to go over a couple secrets. So, let's talk about the different types of buttons, because basically there are... Nortel will tell you that there's 3 different kinds of buttons. There's really 7 types of buttons that you need to know about in an Norstar system. There's line buttons, which are... they map exactly to external lines, so we already went over this line that I have that doesn't work because I don't have an external line. Line buttons come in 3 flavors. They come in loops, target lines, and hunt groups. Alright, loops we talked about last time. They're like analog phone lines or digital phone line channels. Only one person can use, there can only be one call on the line at a time, so when it's in use it shows as in use. There are target lines, which are basically incoming lines mapped to a DID. So if you're using a trunk like ISDN, VoIP, T1, and you're basically mapping the DID, let's say you're mapping the last 4 digits of the number someone dialed to this extension, you would create a target line for that number, and then that target line would be assigned. A target line can only be used for incoming calls. So if you try to dial out on it, you'll get incoming only. This is actually a target line. It's not labeled here, but it is. And the last kind of line isn't really a line, it's a hunt group, but it acts like a line appearance in that it takes up a button, calls that come in on it go to that button instead of to an intercom key, and it pretty much behaves like a line button. A hunt group, if you don't know, is basically a way to set up a number so that when you dial it, it rings multiple phones, either all together in a sequence, or, you know, basically it's like you're trying to find someone to answer your call. You know, think of like a sales department at like a car dealership, that kind of thing. Line keys by default. Now, all these buttons can be reassigned to anywhere on the phone. Line buttons have to be on a button that has an actual display. You cannot assign a line to any of these buttons up here or on any of the phones that have different types of keys that don't have indicators. You can't assign line buttons. They have to have an LCD screen. Again, the only exception to this is the 7100 series phones. They don't have line buttons at all. They have 2 virtual line buttons, and that's the way that gets assigned. And we'll go over the 7100 series in its own part because there's a lot of really unique things about that. Line buttons by default populate from the top left down. So by default, I didn't modify, you know, I didn't move any of these lines around. The system automatically assigned my 3 lines to the first 3 keys. Likewise, we went over intercom keys last time. Intercom keys are for internal calls. They get assigned from the bottom right up. So I have 2 intercom keys, the system automatically assigned them to here and here. The third type of key is an answer key, or an answer button. And that basically is, think of a secretary that needs to answer calls for other people in their absence. Let's say their boss is on break, they need to be able to answer their phone. This is basically an answer key. If someone dials an extension that you have an answer key for, you can see here that this call doesn't just say Robin calling like it would if they were calling me. Robin is actually calling Gary, and I have an answer button for Gary. So you can see that the reason why I'm getting this call is because it's ringing here for Gary. Another behavior of an answer key is that when you press it, when there is no call to answer, it calls the person who you have the answer key for. So it's kind of like an appearance for an internal phone that you might need to answer. Now, these assignments, what lines you have, how many intercom keys you have, and answer keys, these are controlled by the administrator of the phone system. This isn't something that I can change by dialing feature codes. I can't assign myself a line that I don't have access to, and I can't add or delete intercom keys on my own. The administrator has to do that on the back end. And the same thing with answer keys. I can't just make an answer key for someone's phone. Obviously, that would be a huge privacy issue. The other thing about answer keys is that the administrator on the back end can configure them to not ring and only just flash when there's a call. So maybe you just want to be able to pick up the phone if you need to, but you don't really need it to ring your extension. And the way that that works... So let's say I just had my administrator, which is myself, change the functionality of this answer key to be appear only, as Nortel calls it. So now if someone calls Gary, I only see it. I don't hear it. And notice that I still get the LED and I still get the flashing, but I don't need to hear it. Lines can also be programmed to appear and not ring. Now, I don't know who's calling. If I answer the phone, I can see who's calling, but I'm already on the phone with them. Let's say I wanted to screen the call. Well, here's a secret. It's not really a secret, but I've never seen anyone actually tell people this. So if you knew about this, kudos to you. If you really want to know who's calling when an answer key is flashing, here's a new feature code for you. Feature 811. Feature 811 gives you the information about what call is on a line. It says select a call, you press the button. Hey, guess what? Robin is who's calling Gary. And now I can decide, well, fuck Robin. I hate Robin. I'm not going to answer this phone. Before, I would have been, you know, the other way, I'd have to pick up the phone. I'd already be on the phone with Robin, and I'd basically have to hang up or whatever. And if Robin's an internal caller, Robin would see on her display that I'm the one that answered Gary's call. So, you know, you could imagine the political shit that could happen. So, feature 811, you know who's calling. In this case, fuck Robin, I'm hanging up on her. The next type of button, I need to show you a different phone for. The next type of button only appears on the older Series M phones. These phones do not have the 3 keys for speakerphone, mute, and headset. The way that they work, they actually have to dedicate one of their line keys to hands-free and mute if you wanted to use them. So on an M series phone that has hands-free, you have to actually assign a button to be the hands-free button. Let's do a little bit of exploration with this phone. So if we press one of the intercom keys, you'll see that hands-free comes on automatically. Just like on how on the other phone, if I press one of the intercom keys, the little red light on the hands-free button would come on. It's just that it's using a line button here. The interesting thing here isn't how this uses a line key, because other than that, it's really just the same thing as the hands-free key on the other phone, other than it's using one of your lines. The interesting thing comes what happens if you don't assign that button. So I'm actually going to go in the system for this phone, and I'm going to turn that button off. Alright, so this, I've actually unassigned the hands-free button. So this is actually this now. There's 2 intercom keys, and this is a blank button. Now, you'll notice that I still get speakerphone. I can still hear the dial tone. I can still make calls here. Hello, I'm coming out the speaker. But there's no microphone. I can't, on the other side, I can't hear what I'm saying. The microphone is not picking up my voice without that button. And the reason for that is because now there's not only no hands-free button, there's no mute button. So it's basically like I'm permanently muted. The other option is that there's something called standard hands-free. The default is auto hands-free, which is what we've been using, but there's something called standard hands-free, which I've Alright, I've reassigned the hands-free button, but this time I've assigned it as a standard button. There's 3 modes of operation for hands-free. There's none, which is when I took the button away. There's auto, which is what we've been using the whole time and what almost everyone uses. But then there's this weird mode called standard. And what that means is that I don't get the microphone turned on by default. When I go on intercom, I don't get this also showing up unless I press it. So if I go on a phone call without pressing this, it works just like when I didn't have the hands-free button. They can talk to my speakerphone, but I can't talk back through the speakerphone. The interesting thing is that once I press the hands-free button, now I can. Now the other party can hear me. If I press it again, it goes into mute, which is the same thing it would have done on auto. The button flashing means that I'm muted. But the interesting thing is that there's no way to get the hands-free off again. And in fact, what is the difference between having no hands-free, like this, and having hands-free, but with mute on, like this? There is no difference. It's just some very peculiar, weird state that the system can be in that doesn't really have any particular reason. I would expect that when it's in mute, the icon should just disappear. It should really just be called microphone. And You know, because other than that, it operates exactly like the 7100, which has no microphone. If I just get on an intercom, dial a number, and someone answers, I can hear them, they can't hear me. That's just standard function when there's no microphone. So, in reality, if I were designing this, this would probably just say microphone or answer back or something, or it would be inverted. It would just be a mute key. But the fact that this state is different from this state, even though they operate exactly the same, is just very bizarre. Which is probably why they developed automatic hands-free later. That probably came later, I don't know. But someone was like, this is stupid. Why does everyone have to remember to press this button? Oh, you know, so I actually have auto on now. Now here's the really weird thing. When you're in automatic hands-free, so in other words, I pick up a line and it picks up hands-free for me, just like happened on the other series phone, you can't seem to be able to pick up a line without hands-free kicking in. If you don't want them to hear what you're saying, you would just mute it, right? Which we've already discussed is really the same thing as just not having the hands-free. But there is actually a very bizarre way of getting into that state, even when you're in auto mode. Normally you would have to be in standard hands-free to be able to pick up a line and not have hands-free on ever in the first place. But I have found a way to get that same state on this phone when automatic hands-free is available. And the way that you do that is through our other trick. Remember the trick that I said where if you pick up the phone and hang up really quickly, it goes back on hands-free because, you know, you probably fumbled the phone. They don't want to hang up on the person. Well, let's do that. Let's make a call. Someone answers it, and I'm going to really quick do that. So the call is still here. It's still on my intercom key, and I can still hear what the other person is saying. But they can't hear me, and the button isn't on. So that's the only way to get it into that bizarre state with auto hands-free turned on. Enough about fucking hands-free, and let's get this fucking phone out of here. Put this back. Piece of shit. We went over line buttons, intercom buttons, answer buttons, and the hands-free mute button. The final three types of buttons are the three types that can be programmed onto the remaining keys. So these are my intercom keys, these are my line keys. The rest of them, which are all of the line keys in between and all of the buttons up here that don't have a line display, those are all programmable. If I had 10 lines, they would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I had 3 intercom keys, they would go 1, 2, 3, and then I would only get these 3 as programmable, and of course these. These are always programmable because they can never have lines assigned to them. The other thing to note is that you can't choose where the hands-free button shows up. On this phone, which has a hands-free button, it just doesn't appear anywhere, and you never get to relocate that button. Alright, let's go over the next 2 feature codes. If you went and asked a Nortel installer and said, hey, how do I find out what each button does without pressing it? Or, I mean, even if you press it, some of the buttons aren't really clear on what they do. If I press, let's say I didn't know what this was. Let's say I just took this off. By the way, these come off really easily. They, on the new series, they're just plastic things that you put paper behind. And this is a pain in the ass. This is not symmetrical. This doesn't go in like this, it won't go in like this, it won't go in any other way than this exact way. Like even though it would look like I could put it here, you can't. It's actually, each one of these tabs is very unique. It has to be put in this exact fucking position. You can't flip it or anything. Even though it looks symmetrical in 2 different dimensions, it's not. Anyway. Let's say you didn't know what the buttons were and you wanted to find out what they were. You know, some of these features, you know, are obvious. This is Do Not Disturb. You know, but this one, if you didn't know that this was conference, make calls first. Well, transfer says make call first. Conference says make calls first. But this isn't the only button that says make call first if you push it without having a call. So you would never know unless there was some way to find out exactly what this button did. So if you ask the Nortel installer, hey, how do I find out what the buttons do? They'd tell you, oh, you use button inquiry, which is feature *0. And it says press a button. And I'm going to go ahead and press a button, and it's going to tell me what it does. Well, this is line 61, okay? And this one here, that's line 125, aka asshole. And this right here is a hunt group. It's hunt group 1, which is the buoy hunt group. And those are my line buttons. And let's go to my intercom buttons. My intercom buttons show me my extension number and my extension name. And if I go to my answer button, it says answer, and then the extension it's for, Gary. And then all of my other features do exactly what they say. This is a call forward, group pickup, transfer, conference, do not disturb, whatever I happen to have set these to do. Up here I have my group listen. We used my music in part 2. Here's my button that opens voicemail. But it's kind of a lie. It says press a button. I'm going to press 2. I'm pressing a button. I'm going to press hold. That doesn't work. Press volume. I can't press any of the... Oh, and it just exited out. Okay, that's a bullshit feature. If you ask me what button you should press if you want to find out what all the buttons do, I'm going to tell you feature 805. Feature 805 actually is the set test. So there's actually a number of tests you can do in here. So like if you did the display test, it gives you the contrast level, and then it lights up all of the LCD elements that you can see if any of them are broken. The other thing that feature 805 does is it does a button test, which is significantly better than button inquiry. Notice here it says press any button. Nortel is very bizarre like that. You saw earlier make a call, make call first, make calls first. Well, press a button, press any button. In this case, I'm going to press buttons, and it's going to say pretty much give or take the same thing it said before. That's line 61, that's line 125. It didn't tell me that that was asshole, but that's okay. And the other thing that is happening is that it's actually lighting up the indicator next to each button so that I can kind of see that it's working properly. And it actually lights them up in a different way for each kind of line. So for external lines, or lines in general, they just kind of flash on, off, just like if they were ringing. I'm going to get down to these feature buttons, and they're going to tell me the same exact thing that it told me in button inquiry, except the indicator stays on, indicating that they're features and not lines. When I get to my auto dial buttons, we haven't talked about auto dial buttons, but they're basically like speed dial for internal extensions, except they have the added bonus of showing you whether that person's on the phone or not, whether they're off hook. And auto dial buttons kind of give you the indicator with the little telephone on top, kind of showing you that they're a telephone set, I guess, or, you know. Here's some more features, and then here's my intercom buttons. This is my answer DN. This is my answer button for Gary, answer Gary. This kind of blinks like a line. Yeah, it blinks in the exact same way that a line blinks. And then my intercom buttons are down here, and they also blink like lines, and they say intercom here. So there's some slight differences between this and button inquiry. But when we get over here, we can start pressing these buttons. 1, 2, 3. So I can make sure that all the buttons on this phone work without having to dial ridiculous numbers. Volume down, volume up, mute, hands-free, headset, hold. I could press the feature key, I could press soft key 3, 2, 1. I can even press release, and it'll tell me the release key before it ends the feature, which is what happens if I press it a second time, as you'd expect. But let's go back into button inquiry real quick, because there are some things that button inquiry does that you can't do through the other one. When I went back to the line, you'll notice that I get a show here. If I press show, it actually shows me call information, but or trunk information, but it's not going to because the line's not in service. If I go to my intercom key, it says view, and if I press this, it actually shows me the port number on the phone system that this is connected to. This is one of the only ways to find out what port number you're connected to. When you press a line key, you can actually see if the line is redirected. Line redirection is something that we haven't talked about yet, but basically certain users can redirect a line so that it basically is... It's basically like call forwarding for the entire external phone line. And if you press show on a line that's redirected, it'll say who it's redirected by, and if you press show again, it shows you the line that it's redirected to and what number it's going to dial on that line. So in this case, if this actually worked, when I got a phone call on this line, it would have redirected outbound to that line and dialed 1-800, and I don't think there's anything else there, but I was just testing that. But that's something else you can do with button inquiry. And that's the end of this part. In the next part, we're going to go over programming the feature keys and also moving line buttons around and a couple secrets that they don't want you to know about.